the Startup Leaders Club today, online panel discussion by inspirational leaders of innovation and drivers of change. And today we are discussing trends, challenges, and opportunities for tech startups, Series 3, disrupting industries, creating new business models, and finding new opportunities in crisis. And I'm welcoming our panelists today with a brief round of introductions. Hello, David, could you please join us and introduce yourself and the company?
Hi, everyone. My name is David Burke. I'm the co-founder of Beacon Talent. We are a talent consultancy working with growth stage companies, predominantly in the tech ecosystem. We help companies with everything from talent acquisition to organizational planning to talent program design and management retention.
Thank you, David. And Stanley?
Thanks, Nadia. And hello, everyone. My name is Stanley Kirshner-Breen, and I am a sales and marketing operations analyst at Wethos, which is a fully remote company that builds software tools that improves business operation and workflows for independent marketers. A little bit of background on me is I got my start in marketing through a college internship with Uber back in 2014. And since then, I've primarily worked with tech startups, marketing agencies, and nonprofits on everything under the digital marketing sun.
Thank you, Stanley. And James?
Hi, I'm James Haft. I'm the founder of Pal Capital, which is a merchant bank focused on helping companies that are taking advantage of the digitization of information. We focus primarily now on companies which use distributed ledger technologies to create open, decentralized models for communication with the belief that the digitization of value together with the digitization of information creates a unique opportunity for us to create new business models that will serve the population and create global communities.
Thank you, James. And Leon?
I'm Leon Eisen. I'm CEO and founder of Occidental Medical, and I'm inventor of the world's first FDA-cleared wrist sensor pulse oximetry monitor that is widely used today to monitor COVID patients. I created my company in 2010, having a huge experience in medical device development, like engineer, scientist, and executive. And we were lucky to create a platform that perfectly fits all requirements to monitor patients with COVID-19. So we immediately piggyback to all opportunities that were in front of us, and we're growing very quickly. Every week we have a couple of new clients, and our main markets is Italy, UK, United States. So this is who we are.
Thank you, Leon. And you've been with us through the different sessions, and you had lots of observations throughout this pandemic, maybe through your clients' data as well. So do you have any new observations on trends, challenges in your industry in terms of the development of the medical sector?
Yeah, a lot of challenges, a lot of changes. I just talked to many of my friends in telemedicine business, in remote monitoring business. Business is really booming. Success is coming. And what happened, something unusual, unbelievable. Companies, even from the second and third echelon, just come to the top, sell their product. And that's amazing, just to share this success and to see all these opportunities. But actually, what I want to talk today, I would like to talk about success. What is it in general? Because in general, this is a state of mind. And paradigm of COVID-19 just shifts state of mind. You know, Nadia, I was born and grow in Soviet Union. And I left Soviet Union exactly after everything happened there. And I know what is it before, and I know what is it after. I know how it influences on mindset of people. It's a huge shift. And this shift impact on our inner understanding of reality and our outer world, that is reality itself. And I have a lot of interesting observation how belief system of people changes. how state of mind really changes, about vision, why state, how they focus changes, and even their standards. That's amazing to look at these. And also what happens in out of work that influence on people mind changes. It's a change of rules. For example, if even a couple of 3 months ago, I had to fly to other country to get to the meeting with people, and all efficiency of these spend of time and money, a lot of money, was about 5%. Today, rules are totally different. You can make business from safety of your home and through the Zoom, and you don't have to dress appropriately like in a business meeting. So all rules are changing abruptly, and this is very nice to see, and I like it very much, and I'm just happy that I'm living in such a very interesting time in a some how to say in a change between our old world and totally new world that is mostly digital, remote, and it will grow.
Thank you, Leon. And James, you also mentioned a bit of a behavioral change. And you mentioned also the effects of community decentralization you're working on. So what would be your address in terms of that? So how your business answers to that trends in digitalization, decentralization, and what are the key priorities in this sphere?
Well, I think that, I agree with Leon that, focusing on success is always interesting, and that success really is a function of how you define success, which is something I always talk to my portfolio companies about. If you are clear on how you define success, it's a lot easier to accomplish. But having said that, I agree with with Leon's assessment that the world is digital, and it's been amazing to see how my business has actually been growing during the pandemic because of the our ability to be interconnected digitally. But that really calls into the spotlight the incredible inefficiencies and unfairness of our current systems. Right now, if you're sitting in a place with beautiful broadband and and food and and supplies, this is not that bad a period of time. But if you're one of the billions of people around the globe who are unbanked, who don't have fresh water, who are scared witless by all the lies and confusion and obfuscation that's going on from the governments with relation to the COVID-19 and the economic disasters that are happening around us. What's happening is that we're just becoming more and more painfully aware of how the current system really doesn't work for most people, for most of the population of the world. And I think that represents both a problem and an opportunity. The problem is that that people need to have their basic needs fulfilled. Otherwise, they will stop fitting within the social contract that keeps peace and prosperity as a possibility. But the opportunity is that those people want to be part of the first world. They want to be part of all the advances that are happening. There's enough communication around that they know what's going on, and that they just want to be part of this process. And so, now, this is the first time in humanity that we've had, essentially free broadband communication globally, where almost anybody is within a mile or 2 miles or a reasonable distance from real open communications, and that presents an opportunity for people who are now presenting low-cost, easy-to-use opportunities to participate in the global economy. And so that's really where we've been focusing, because if you look at these new business models that are coming online that are digital, the technology is interesting, it needs to be solved, but essentially we look at technology as being binary. It either works or it doesn't work. If it doesn't work, I don't really have to worry about the business, right? If it works, it's still not an interesting business to me until I know who's going to use it. So if I give you $10 million for your business, tomorrow you'll have the same problem you had yesterday, I'll have to figure out how to get my money back, and we'll all be the same place we were. But if I can bring you 10 million users, then your platform is going to go from zero to hero pretty quickly, and we'll be able to raise funds and you'll be able to propagate yourself globally. So we're much more focused on bringing community into opportunities than we are on money or technology, because we think the community and the activity of the people is actually the opportunity going forward.
Thank you, James. And Stanley also work with communities probably in marketing side and advertising and all this field. So what would be your observations on the current trends, challenges, opportunities you could mention?
Yeah, absolutely. And the independent marketing space is very community driven. The vast majority of independent marketers, and again, these are people who may be calling themselves freelancers, business owners, consultants, boutique agency owners, participants in collectives. So wide group of people, many of them very high earning. The vast majority of them get their leads for new opportunities from their existing network. So the community that's built between these people is very strong and a key to the business success. But on the line of trends and challenges, of course, with COVID hitting, a lot of companies pulled back their advertising spends as well as trimmed their internal teams. And in general, there was just less money to go around for marketing. So of course, that was a challenge, but the trends, on one end, there's massive digital transformation happening. So there is a high need for technical implementations and really good comms right now. And additionally, the environment is becoming much more remote, as both Leon and James said, and the vast majority of independent marketers do work remotely. And traditionally, there has been a barrier to entry where if a company is primarily physical and as a digital independent consultant, you're trying to get in there, there's a lot of barriers to just the workflows that happen. And it makes it difficult for some of these smaller teams to be able to get access to some of the large opportunities. But now, of course, with everyone going remote, and it's something like a New York Times article cited, it was over 300 million people in America that were either working, socializing, or schooling remote. So pretty much everyone. Now there's real case studies and there's metrics around productivity. And to the people who have been doing remote for a while, it's not a big surprise, but to some of the newcomers, it very much is. That productivity hasn't gone down and has actually increased across the board. And so that is very much a paradigm shift, as Leon was saying. And I think that is going to lead to many more pathways for these digital independent marketers to attach themselves to some of these larger organizations and more seamlessly fit into their workflows. So I think the independent marketers that are viewing this opportunity and they're aware of that and they're able to position their services to hit on the digital transformation needs that many companies have, and the ones that have already built out structures to handle remote work and project management, I think those people will definitely succeed. And on the other end for companies, the ones that invest in building structures and infrastructure are going to be the ones that see the best results and continue to benefit for it. And I think there will be a direct correlation between companies that invest in building a internal remote structure and ones that don't, of who continues to use it. The people who don't invest in it and just hope that everything kind of works itself out, they probably won't see as much productivity and will go back to the traditional way of doing things. The companies that are really investing and looking at this as a long-term initiative, and there are some really big players now, like Twitter and Slack and Facebook even, have given their employees a lot more freedoms with remote work. Those people, they're gonna really see all the gains from it. So I think, remote is a huge change affecting all of our industries, but it does have interesting implications for specifically the independent marketer and just generally independence. So that's what I've been looking at.
Thank you, Stanley. And David, you also work with lots of human talent, human resource, and what are the challenges, opportunities there? What are the trends you could mention and share with us in terms of community management and maybe just working with the talent resource in your own teams?
Yeah, happy to. So I think echoing, what kind of Stanley's talked about here is we've been on this trend line of seeing companies moving towards more remote working paradigms for a long time. This is the current pandemic is only accelerating that trend. And I think it kind of, as James had sort of mentioned, like, thinking we're going to go back to the past is not really a good way to think about it. We are going back to the future. We are going to the future, and whatever direction it's going to look like, key elements of how we work and how we operate as teams are going to fundamentally change. As you think about, one of the biggest issues we run into right now is companies struggling with understanding how to actually phase people coming back into work. New York City just launched the next phase of their reopening, and a lot of workers are not going to be coming back into the office, even though legally they're now able to. So I think those changes we're going to see over time. There's going to be a sort of all of those transitions back into how we're going to be working going forward are going to start to emerge over the next, call it 3 to 6 months. And I think a lot of those trends will really take root in that period of time. One of the challenges that creates for companies is, again, not only how do we manage and work with our team in a much more remote, decentralized way, which requires exactly the type of tools that Stanley's talking about, project management tools, productivity tools. How do we connect, in a way through Zoom or things that aren't as sort of transactional as Zoom, and how do we continue to maintain the kind of sense of community that we get in our companies. But I think from a hiring perspective, companies are also really struggling and understanding, we work with a lot of companies who are like, well, how can I actually hire somebody who I've never met? And that's easy for a company that's always been structured as a remote organization. But if you're an early stage company, you're under 50 people, I mean, every single hire you make is such an important piece of the puzzle for you. And being able to establish processes, best practices, and tools that can help you continue to have a really high level of confidence in making the right hires and bringing the right members into your organization. Again, whether those be full-time employees or 1099 contractors, ultimately you need to have the right mechanisms and tools in place to make sure that you're able to do that consistently and successfully. So we've seen that as a big piece of the puzzle.
Thank you, David. And James, what is in focus of attention of your clients at the moment? So what is the most recurrent questions you get? And if you could share that.
Most of the businesses that I'm focusing on right now are focused on what we're calling DeFi, on decentralized finance, and on the ability of people to control their own wealth and transact globally in ways that they choose, what the methodologies are and what the risks are. There's people who are concerned about the value of the dollar and the current economic system. There's people who right now don't have access to bank accounts and would like to be able to do remote transactions. There's people who want to control their data, and how that data is used, whether it's related to politics or value or healthcare, that are looking to new platforms which enable you to control your own information. So most of the people that I'm working with, are really focusing on how to take individuals and consumers and enable them to behave in the way that the wealthy class has been able to behave over the last 2 centuries. If you're a wealthy person over the last 200 years, you put your money into Switzerland or Liechtenstein or the Cayman Islands, and you determined what jurisdiction you were being governed by, and you determined which taxes you paid and how you behaved. And those opportunities now are being given to people in Africa and China, as well as the United States and Asia, to start to choose your own jurisdiction. And I see a movement over time now for people to actually start to assess the value of complying with the systems that have been put upon us for the last 100 years, where there was an easy trade to have the security of an FDIC guarantee for your bank account, or to have the government protect you in certain ways. And it started to become apparent, I think, to most of the population that governments and the centralized authorities that we've been using have their own agendas. And then I'm not saying this as a political manifesto, I'm just saying it's almost kind of obvious at this point now, especially with what's happening in the United States political scene, that, the things that we relied on, that we thought were certain, now are becoming assumptions that maybe are worth testing. So I see people issuing credit cards that can be spent against several currencies. I see people enabling bank accounts and bank-like accounts that offer interest when your bank doesn't offer interest anymore. I see payment systems where you get to earn rewards and reward-like benefits for keeping your payments within a certain system. And so you slowly see value and flexibility moving from big corporations and the wealthy into the consumer arena. And really, if I had to characterize the business flow at my desk, most of the business fits within that flow.
Thank you, James. And Leon, so what are your observations across your clientele? So what are the challenges there? And maybe you get some new requests, new formats of requests from your clients.
Yeah, I just want to follow what James said, because he was right about changes, what happening in bank industry, and we experienced the similar changes. It's called consumerization of healthcare. So it becomes more patient-centric, more data-driven, and this is what happens. So our customers require more data, require better security, and most important, then they require user-friendly devices and user-friendly technologies. So they don't have to spend a lot of time on patients. So we can understand consumerization of healthcare like some, not only like trend, like a workflow where healthcare system receive information from the patient, and patient receive continuous care from the healthcare system. And the main problem that so far before COVID, people couldn't understand why there is a steady growing of healthcare cost. And actually they designed a lot of telehealth companies and all these, it didn't work. It's still growing. And if take a more better look on data of the cost of healthcare, we could understand that 80% of cost of healthcare belong to high risk and patients with severe chronic conditions. And this is true. But what COVID revealed, nobody did pay attention on these patients before at all. Nursing home weren't ready to manage their patient. Long-term healthcare facilities wasn't ready. Nobody was ready to help high risk and elderly patients. And actually these patients consume all our money and physicians' time. Physician cannot recognize between a patient who is compliant and who is not compliant but very sick. Who is compliant, physician accept like a sick patient comes to me every week. Okay, I have to help him. He asks for help. And non-compliant people at home and twice a year in emergency room, that costs $20,000 for us. So this is the main problem that became much clear. And now what I'm working on, this is my vision, and what I'm talking about and try to deliver this message to our world, that let's pay more attention and let's invest in health of people with high risk, with chronic disease, very sick people. And this will pay off, dramatically pay off. We will save, I don't know, bunch of money we will save just shifting paradigm into this direction. So not just telemedicine, not just monitoring, invest in these people, and this will pay off.
Thank you, Leon. And Stanley, what are the most promising areas in your field in terms of investments? What would you recommend as new emerging segments for revenue generation?
Yeah, I believe that remote collaboration tools are going to be massive in the next 5 years, particularly as, again, enterprise really gets into the game. I think we've seen that there have been a number of startups that have had huge success in this realm, Loom being one of them, a video recording software, and among many others. But I think generally most of the software that's been built has been built for kind of our historic system. So even something like Slack, or you mentioned Zoom. I think James, you mentioned Zoom being very transactional, which is true. I think we need a new breed of remote collaboration tool that will really allow dozens of team members to be able to collaborate and communicate in a synchronous and seamless way. So I think we're seeing some tools have success here, but the companies that can come out and develop a next gen communication platform that has the work baked into it is going to have a huge advantage and huge success in the marketplace. And I think we will see we're already seeing it, but in the next 6 months, there are going to be a lot of early stage startups and side ideas that are being born from people experiencing the pain points of working remote, because the tools that were built weren't built to support 300 million people working remotely. So of course, there's going to be pain points, there's going to be friction, there's going to be barriers to actually doing what you want to do. And of course, whenever there's pain, that means there's value to be added, and entrepreneurs will start trying to build tools to take advantage of that. So I think there's a ton of opportunity in the suite of collaboration tools that will need to come up as tens of millions and hundreds of millions of people continue to work remotely.
I agree with that. I think that those modalities actually already exist, and it's just repurposing of technologies that were already on the railroad tracks before the pandemic. Most importantly, I think you're going to see that virtual reality and augmented reality is going to really become much more important, as we need to find ways to add more context to digital interactions. And so, I think that, I'm a big consumer of science fiction. My whole business is based around a book called Snow Crash, which was written in 1992, that kind of predicted everything that's happening now. And we're only about halfway through the book, interestingly enough. And so the idea now that we'll be able to communicate, I think, virtually and have ways to add context, I think, is what you're going to see as one of the big changes happening now. For instance, I think we're going to move from conferences and video spaces to meeting rooms that are omnipresent, so that you'll have spaces that are very much like real estate, where you can wander and where you won't have to be there by appointment, but you'll actually be able to be there ad hoc, where people can start to aggregate and have serendipity as more of a impact on creativity and communication. I also think you'll start to see that these virtual spaces will enable us to propagate the types of technologies I was talking about earlier, as we'll have avatars, which really will be no more than digital wallets that are carrying information and value, and that we can algorithmically program to transact and have interactions with people and accomplish goals for us without us even having to be present. So I think you're going to see a whole new world. Unfortunately, this is also going to lead to a widening of the digital divide that we were talking about earlier, unless it starts to lead towards until it starts to lead towards omnipresence and the availability of this for the general public.
Yeah, I'll tack onto that, James. I mean, it's interesting what we've seen, even in the last couple of months. I think we've seen so many companies struggling to figure out actually how to run their sales programs. You can't do cold email the way you used to. Performance marketing is obviously, still a very effective a channel, but I think a lot of companies have been trying to figure out how do we create authentic interaction through our sales and marketing efforts. And what we've seen is increasingly that is going online. Networking events like this, I mean, part of the reason I joined an event like this is because I actually think this is the future of how folks are going to be interacting, creating connection in a world that's increasingly remote. And how do you create those sort of more, as you put it, serendipitous interactions, which again have more authenticity to them rather than perhaps a prescribed set sort of time to meet. And so it's something I think that trend's accelerating very quickly. And you're already seeing other platforms popping up. I mean, one of the things this has definitely accelerated is, all of the platforms that host events, digital online events, they're now really starting to see a lot of traction, a lot of interest, not just Zoom. I think there's a lot of other platforms out there that have actually created much more customization around separate meeting rooms, and have made it a much more sort of fluid, like interaction that sort of reflects what a conference looks like actually in the real world.
Yeah, recently I participated in one webinar that was using such a platform, Remo, UK company. They created incredible experience, incredible. So it looks like the real conference room, a real tables, chairs. So you can have 6 chairs and 6 people on one table. You can jump from one table to another. You can just get with people into their specific room or separate room to talk. That's amazing experience. I like it very much. So I just want you to try Remo, and that's amazing.
How do you spell that?
Platform?
RREMO.
And Stanley, you also...
Remo, I think. Huh? Sorry?
Stanley, you also had a comment?
Yeah, James, I was curious if you've heard of the platform called Sococo before. They're a pretty early stage company, but they have something like what you're describing, where you can basically set up virtual offices, and then you have an avatar, and when people enter the office, you can just talk to them. There's no inviting them to a meeting or something. If you're in the same office, then everyone can hear each other. Of course, it doesn't have some of the other aspects that you described, like more of like the wallet and things like that. But I agree that I think for that type of software to really take it to the next level, it needs more integration with aspects of your life. And I think, that is another trend of, I think work is becoming more integrated in people's lives. And particularly, with people working the same place that they're living. And I think the next generation of tools will have to be more of a lifestyle type of software that isn't just something you turn on, when you're going into a meeting, but it's something you have on at all times, because that's how you manage your social life, your family life, and your work life. But also in terms of how do you generate authentic interactions within your community? I think the number one rule is you have to give them space. You have to give them a space to be where they can ask questions or play around or talk with one another. So we've been making a big effort to do this at Wethos. One, by creating a community Slack, which, where we post opportunities and allow people to connect with each other. But also we started doing digital events after COVID hit. To be able to both give opportunities to our existing network by paying them to host an event, but also having them host an event on a topic that is very timely and relevant to others in our target audience. And of course, that sparks conversation. People subscribe to the newsletter to hear more. And we've seen that net out and just generally more traction digitally. So I think, if you want to give people a community for them to interact and engage with your brand, you have to build it first. And then also, I totally agree that going forward, I don't think digital events are going anywhere. And it's kind of, very personally, anecdotally, a lot of people who I've spoken with have been speaking to people virtually that they haven't spoken to in a long time. Basically, they're just being more social in general through video. So it's not just replacing what was, a professional meeting or something. Now it's replacing what maybe was a text is now actually a video call. So I think, there are huge implications both for, giving people spaces and giving them programming that is valuable to them, but then also having services and features that really do integrate into their more personal life and lead to a more work-life integration, cohesion, rather than kind of work-life balance, which is, kind of the cliche.
I have a question to James. Interesting question. How is there any shift of regulation and regulatory authority towards accepting digitalization of banking business today? So how COVID impact on such a shift, if there is one?
Right. So in some circles, I'm perceived as a troublemaker on this subject. So I'm one of the experts globally on security tokens and on the creation of digital securities, because I've had the background of emerging markets and liquidity strategies, for 30 years, moving from the physical world and emerging markets being countries to the emerging market being the digitization of information. And so one of the mantras has been, if we just had more regulation, if the regulation was just more clear, then everything's going to take off. And every group that you talk to walks in the door with, we're the first ones to get approval and we're the only ones that are going to get approval. My observation is that the current system doesn't really want this change because they don't know what's on the other side of the door. And so they're terrified that if they open the wrong door or say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing, that the system will spin out of control, or even worse than that, they will become irrelevant. And so you have this system that's paralyzed, trying to hold on as long as it can, and the people that are making the profits, that are getting all the power, that have been taking advantage of all the levers, are holding on to those and trying to keep that the same as hard as they can. So there's no one in power that really wants the digitization of banking or the digitization of securities, and this is why it hasn't happened. Because if you look at the ICOs and you look at the times when liquidity has rushed into the market, it hasn't been the individuals who were supposedly being abused or defrauded who were the ones that put the brakes on the systems. To the contrary, the more that the systems went live and had more liquidity and more trends and more activity, the more people wanted it, and the more people were coming into the vortex, and the governments were actually putting the restrictions on in contravention of the actual enthusiasm of the population that wants this democratized access to other opportunities. So my belief is that the system doesn't want these changes, and that the powers that are making money are going to slow it down as long as can to milk the system. But that the authorities are not really going to be in the control seat forever, and maybe not even for much longer. Because one of the advantages of these new cryptographic systems is that there are, by definition, the true systems are censorship proof. So in other words, you can't really control them. And if you start to try and regulate them, any one point that you might stop would not stop the entire machine because of the way they're developed. So my belief is that these censorship-proof platforms that already exist, just like virtual reality already exists, that these platforms are going to start to be used more and more, and that as the population starts to understand that they're there and that they're available and that they're in many ways preferable, then I think you'll see a movement until you reach a critical mass. Now, where that critical mass is, I don't have the crystal ball, but I know that we are approaching it. Whether it's asymptotically yet or not, I'm not sure. And that as we move down that curve, the ability of the existing system to manage that transition becomes smaller and smaller over time. And so what I think is you're going to see that humanity in general doesn't recognize things until after they happen. So it's not going to be until after there is a viable decentralized system that everyone starts to focus on that, oh my God, we have a decentralized system that works. And so we have examples like Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera, but I think we're still on the continuum of heading towards that direction.
Thank you, James. And David, what would you mention in terms of the behavioral shifts in the community? So you mentioned that there is more of inspiration to work remotely, even for those people who have some stable jobs and so on and so forth. So how to keep up the spirits within your team and to make it work not only efficiently, but to succeed as well in the current environment?
Sure. So, I mean, I think first at the macro level, the behavioral shifts, I would say the number one behavioral shift I've seen is really, adversity to risk. I think people are very, like, the psychological effect of the layoffs that have happened are very real. And so we've seen a lot of people with good positions at good companies staying put. And I think actually this has been a great opportunity for, the FANGs, Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Google. They're in a great position right now because they are a stable, low risk place to work. And so just from a kind of transactional talent standpoint, over the next, I would say, call it 6 to 12 months, it's going to be harder for earlier stage companies to attract and get the best talent. I would say from a actual, like, kind of intercompany dynamic, I mean, it creates a lot of challenges. One thing that we really believe in is the concept that people drive kind of innovation, growth, and development at an organization. That's what creates kind of customer or constituency value. That's what creates shareholder value. And so how do you continue to create a sense of community, a sense of kind of mission and vision? I think for every individual company, they need to reevaluate, where are we at? Have we articulated our vision and our mission? Do we have a set of values? What defines culture? It's values and rituals, right? And we treat values as a decision-making framework that helps everyone in an organization operate in kind of a consistent way when it comes to making the right decisions as a function of that organization. And then rituals, so many of our rituals happen, in real life. And so how do we make that transition to establishing and creating rituals that can happen when we're in fully decentralized remote organizations? I think it's challenging. I think a lot of the kind of next wave of technology we've talked about here is going to facilitate that. But, at the end of the day, our experience has been technology supports process. It doesn't create process. You have to actually have an intelligent design and strategy first. You have to be thoughtful and intentional about how you're going to cultivate, a good culture, good dynamics across your team. And then these tools can support that, but it can't replace it.
Thank you, David and Stanley. So you were lucky to attract a round of financing prior to COVID. So do you see any trends in fundraising? What would you advise to companies who are in fundraising now in your field or maybe some others?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in this area, so I think probably some other people on the panel would have some better ideas, but I'm happy to give a few opinions. So we've been very lucky that all of our investors have truly been partners, and that before we did any deal, we made sure that it was a right fit on a cultural level as well, and that they were aligned in terms of the management and input they'd have in the organization. So that allowed us a lot of flexibility. It's allowed us a lot of flexibility in how we run our business and to take advantage of opportunities that pop up and to pivot quickly when needed and things like that. But in terms of what I'm seeing from, more macro, talking with some of my friends and colleagues, it does seem like the valuations are going down for early stage startups for sure. And additionally, I think it's going to be a difficult fundraising environment the next 6 to 12 months. And so I think what that means is companies need to cost cut where they can, be extremely efficient with their spending, and try to come as close to profitability as possible. So I think, of course, there are still VCs giving out checks, and there's a lot of companies still fundraising. But if you don't want to get caught where you absolutely need money in the next 6 months, because then you may have to give up a lot more equity than you expected. And I think we're seeing this on the largest scale with some of the biggest companies, the public companies that didn't save very much money and they were very cash strapped. They had to get help immediately. And I think we'll see a similar thing of early stage companies when, if they made a huge play towards growth and their sales are slowing up, they're going to be in a tough position. So I think, obviously, I think a lot of the worst is over with COVID, and people have had opportunity to plan and to restructure. But in general, I think going into really uncertain events, having cash in the bank and having as long of a burn rate as you can is, of course, extremely valuable assets.
Okay. So I totally agree. But having said that, some of the biggest and most important tech companies in the world were formed during downturns like this one. And so the crucible that forces focus and brings out opportunity, is a double-edged sword. I'll add two things that just what Stanley just said, just and how we coach startups and early stage businesses. The first one is that the number one way that startups go out of business is they run out of money. Okay, so you just got to really focus on the fact of what's your runway and how do you stay in business, because that goes to the second corollary, which is you can only be in business if you stay in business, if you stay alive long enough to be successful. Because so you really right now are testing the entrepreneurial skills, and you're really creating this great screening mechanism where the weak are getting weeded out, and where the successful have a chance, A, because their competition gets weaker, and B, because they understand how to navigate the straits that they're going through, that you really create the opportunity for those who are good to succeed.
James, to play devil's advocate on that, and I generally agree, but if you look at, the recession in 2008, 9, 10, you saw actually funding levels at seed and Series A didn't drop off that much, right? It was more later stage investment that really took a hit. The question and really the concern I have and sort of see in the broader market dynamic is it looks like, and you made the point, there's a lot of money sitting on the sidelines now that needs to be invested, but there's also a lot of very risk adverse investors. I wouldn't say investors are necessarily looking for huge returns right now. They're looking for, returns. And so I worry that in this environment, you're actually going to see a lot less funding at the seed and Series A stages, and actually a lot more piling into later stage rounds.
Well, but the environment's different today than it was in 2006, 2007 to 9. Back then, family offices were not as well organized and formed, and didn't represent as large a percentage of the Series B, C, D, E as they do today. And so the difference between a family office and a hedge fund is that a family office can sit on top of their wealth, and they're not really penalized in terms of their livelihood for not expending their money, because their job is to maximize the pool of money over time that they can then pass along, through inheritance and through other forms of, of distribution. Whereas the managed money at the funds needs to be invested or returned to investors, and returning the money to investors, unfortunately, is deemed as failure as opposed to the right thing to do in most situations. So today, bringing that into today's environment, there's much larger percentage of family offices who are prone to sit on their hands during these risks, because they actually sense the value of having dry capital during this period, because they tend to be value investors, because that money is theirs, they actually earned it, right? As opposed to the professional investors who are still there as an asset class, but actually are smaller as a percentage than they were in the previous, in 2009. So what I see is that the family offices will act in the way you're talking about. They will sit on their money and be more difficult, and will drive prices down. But that the managed money, I think it's got to come out. I just don't see the managers acting in a way other than the predictable way where they take a risk on a portfolio to try and get one outsized return, so that they can, earn their big bonus.
Even though those investors potentially are going to, if you are a hedge fund or a VC, I mean, right now it seems like, well, yeah, I think that's fair. Ultimately, as a VC, your job is to invest in as many, companies as you possibly can, right? You're playing roulette effectively. Whereas, the hedge funds, I think in the past downturn, they still had a mandate to go deploy that capital as well. And that's where
got destroyed. The hedge funds got destroyed in 2009. There were more bankruptcies of hedge funds during that period than the previous 20 years.
And so you don't see the same dynamic playing out here. This is where look at the valuation of Peloton right now. It's insane. It's like all this money is piling into these, and IPOs are continuing to accelerate in the environment, which tells me it's the late stage rounds where a lot of the money's going in, not necessarily those earlier stage companies.
If you wanted to make excess returns today as a hedge fund, all you have to do is buy Apple stock.
Right.
So so I don't know. I think there's a bunch of interesting things happening in the markets right now. I think that again, not to be boring, but the centralization of power and authority over capital, builds this too big to fail mentality, where you get these false reads on valuation because you're only looking at the activities of a small percentage of the participants. So, so I think the stock market is really high because Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, control most of the financial levers in our government, and that they're colluding right now to keep things high. And whether they're colluding intentionally or whether it's just by the design of the system, we can have that debate anytime you want. But the reality is that Wall Street no longer represents Main Street. And that's dangerous for us. I think I think money is available for good ideas. I don't believe that this is a hard time to raise money if you have a good idea. You may have to pay a little more for the capital, but I still believe it's available. I'm still having people around me that want to invest. They just don't want to invest in the same old crap they've been investing in over the last 10 years. They want the new stuff.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. And what I see that, and I feel it because we're getting to the next round of investment. We decided to start now to piggyback on growth. And a lot of VC, they don't understand where they are now. They don't understand at all what happens. And they're looking for some answers. And they just stop to invest until it will be more clear the direction of our world and what happens. And I don't think it's because of management of VC. I think it's because of all their investors. It's a mindset of their investors to wait, because their investors, it could be family offices, it could be non-professional investors as well, and that they get crazy about what happens. So what I'm doing now, for each venture capital fund, I'm looking for a warm introduction. I check their investors, I check their board, and I investigate their investors, make some research, and try to understand what mindset, what state of mind these investors have today. So they influence on their venture capital, because from venture firm you will never get a true answer. Yeah, they're not honest with you. So, but they can be honest if you can understand what they mean. If they say no, let's see, let's wait. If you just check their manifest, investment manifest, and if you check their investors as well. So this gives you much bigger and appropriate picture about whom to apply, what to ask, how to build qualification questions to this investor, and how to manage sales of your company, I would say.
Thank you, Leon. And the final round of questions, just a key address of a takeaway from today's discussion from each of you, just a couple of words for our serial entrepreneurs and VC investors who are representing our community. So what would be your takeaway and maybe recommendation to go for our audiences? David?
So I think sorry, just to recap, the big takeaway for the audience. Look, I mean, I think we've called out here, one of the underlying themes is that in periods of massive change and uncertainty, it creates a lot of opportunity. I think that's absolutely right. I think as you relates to the field that we're operating in around talent, the next crop of companies that are going to pop up, they're going to be driven by humans. They're going to be enabled by, computers and technology of all sorts of, types. But at the end of the day, it is still people that are driving kind of innovation and growth of these organizations. And I think the ability to bring people together into an organization and build a culture around that is something that's going to be a really big piece of the puzzle for so many companies. So again, how do you think about these concepts around, around culture, around values, around the rituals that you establish at your organization in order to be able to go the distance really as an organization. Because I think if you look at all these companies as well, the crop of companies that came up in the last recession, Airbnb, like a lot of the marketplace businesses. I mean, right now, those companies are having to figure out how they're going to adapt and change and evolve to the new world. And the ability to adapt and innovate and be resilient is ultimately a function of the people and the culture that those people create at any given organization. So, it's just a big piece of the puzzle and something we really focused on here.
Thank you, David. And James?
I agree. And I think that, that the most important message right now is to not, you're only a victim if you define yourself as a victim of the circumstance. So I think that, now is an important time to take stock of what you're trying to accomplish and look at the advantages that you might have because of the existing, because of what's happening in the world, and try to reshape your view and reshape your, your activities to try and take advantage rather than to be punished by what's happening around you.
Thank you, James. And Stanley?
Yeah, I think the only constant in this world is change. And we happen to be in a time that's changing very rapidly. And I think the winners of this time, as is most uncertain times, are the people who are able to be flexible, move quickly. Essentially, yeah, those two things. If people can be flexible and move quickly and they have the skill sets around them, they can absolutely succeed. So that would be my word for entrepreneurs who are listening. Examine what you think is missing in the marketplace now and go build that.
So it's me. My message to entrepreneurs that they have to be in the sales mode all the time, because only sales and get to the market, try to sell, independent at which stage of product development you are now, even you don't have product, even you have only idea stage, get to the market, try to sell, because this is only way to get market response, to try it, to put your finger to the water and understand the temperature of this water. Is it worth? It is or not worth? Talk to investors, talk to customers, talk to friends, sell the product, sell yourself. So always be in sales mode, create sales mindset, build the questionnaire, build qualification questionnaire for your customers, for investors, and get to the street, talk to them, and get invaluable feedback about how to proceed. And this will give you the snap of what happens and understanding of what will happen, because our brain is the best artificial intelligent brain in our world. Artificial intelligent machine in our world. Artificial.
Yeah. Thank you so much to all. So we started with a human and now artificial intelligent approach. So it's good for our panel discussion to have many insights for today. And just in 15 minutes, we'll start with the panel discussion of investments and pivots during pandemic on supply chains and logistics. And so I wish you all the best for the week. And please join our Startup Leaders Club's keynotes, firesides, masterclasses, and road shows with pitch competitions for startups. And